Girard at Large radio program is on the air.
Good morning, Manchester.
With your host, Richard Girard.
Thanks for tuning in.
On 90.7 WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio.
GirardAtLarge.com.
Damn, I'm good!
Bringing you live and local news from your own backyard. With DJ Dave on traffic. Mike Ball with news. Steve Messa with sports. And Al Caprillion with the weather.
Good morning!
This is Girard at Large.
On 90.7 WLMW, New Hampshire Family Radio.
This is Girard at Large.
Good morning, Manchester, and to those of you in the surrounding towns, welcome to Hour 3 of Girard at Large. I am your doing all right this morning host, Rich Girard. Thanks for tuning in. Our time is 8:06, and we will be taking your questions for our next guest. Congressman Frank Guinta joins us by phone, so that you know that means here on Girard at Large. You can't call in.
Tweet them up.
But you can get to our Twitter handle, @Girard at Large, and post your questions for Congressman Guinta, or you can post them on our Facebook page, or you can go to our website at GirardAtLarge.com and use the conveniently located Ask a Question feature on our homepage. We'll be sure to pass along your questions to the Congressman. Good morning, Congressman Guinta.
Morning, Rich. How are you?
You're just doing great, getting better every day. How about yourself?
Well, I'm doing very well. Good to be back in New Hampshire.
Yes, you are in New Hampshire. You had a debate yesterday. By the way, I suppose the first order of business is to congratulate you on a solid 85% of the primary vote here in the recent September 11th primary. How are you feeling about that, Frank?
Well, I feel great. I'm looking forward to, moving forward in this final 7 weeks of the campaign and, show the clear differences between myself and my opponent. But I, have appreciated the opportunity to serve the people of the 1st Congressional District and obviously decided to run for a second term, so I'm looking forward to that and hoping and asking for people to support my effort and try to change the way Washington works, focus on the economy and jobs, fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility, and really, for the first time in a long time, have a group of people in Washington who are very much willing to make the necessary changes to get our economy going and moving our country in a very, very different direction than that of the president and where he wants to take our country.
Congressman, there was recently a vote taken that would basically, it had one of those silly titles that come out of Congress. What was the Preserve Jobs and Save National Security Act or some such thing, which would have repealed the sequester and required the president to come up with cuts to replace those, if I'm not mistaken. Would you, for our listeners, give some clarity on what that bill was, what that vote was, and how you voted on it?
Sure. This is the third vote that the House has taken regarding sequester. Essentially, the sequester affects $109 billion in automatic cuts to defense that would essentially result in the smallest army since 1940, the smallest Navy since 1916, and the smallest Air Force in our history. We don't oppose reducing spending to defense. We've already actually done that last year. But the sequester, we feel, is just not an appropriate way to defend our nation. So we've taken 3 different votes. The first 2 were proposals that we passed in the House for replacements to the sequester cuts. And we've sent that off to the Senate, basically stating, look, give us your agreement on which cuts you would agree to, and we'll get this done. But so far the Senate has not acted. So last week we voted again because there was a deadline that required the president to propose what his cuts would be, and that deadline came and gone, and without any response from the president. So we obviously voted on a bill that required him to do so.
Did we lose the congressman?
No, he finished his statement, Rich.
Well, he faded out on this end.
Hi, Rich, are you there?
Yeah, we're here. Can you hear us, Congressman?
Yes, I can.
All right, Frank, the last thing I heard you say was that the president failed to follow through on his proposed cuts under the sequester.
Yeah, he was supposed to provide us about a week and a half ago with his proposals as to what he would cut in the sequester. He failed to do so. So then we, for a third time, voted last week stating that the president's got to give us what his proposed cuts are, and we reiterated our position that we don't think sequester is the right approach. And again, earlier in the year, we have proposed a sort of menu of cuts that the Senate could act upon to replace the sequester cuts. So this is sitting in the Senate, once again, Rich, like many other bills that we've passed in the House, awaiting action. And here's how this affects New Hampshire from an economic perspective. I already talked about the defense perspective, but you're talking about 4,000 jobs in the state of New Hampshire if the sequester goes through. So, this is not the way to run government. We all believe in balancing our budget and having a pro-growth economy. This is just not the right way to do it.
Congressman, remind us how this whole sequester mess came to pass in the first place. Was this part of one of those budget deal that extended the debt ceiling limit?
Well, essentially, that's correct. And what the president and Senator Harry Reid wanted was automatic spending cuts in the area of defense in exchange for some of the cuts we were looking for in long-term discretionary spending outside of defense. It wasn't, in my view, a good idea, but, we ultimately in the House felt that we could find a way to get these reductions. The Senate, essentially said to us, look, we will work with the House in trying to find cuts. So they reiterated that sequester would never happen. And then, if you remember, the super committee got together, couldn't come up with the necessary cuts, so sequester kicked in. It was a bad way to govern. It was a mistake, and it shouldn't have happened. But now we're trying to solve that problem, and we can because we have now passed a menu of cuts that from which the Senate can choose in how they want to reduce spending. And I think, Rich, this is dangerously close to playing politics with something that is very, very critical in defending our nation.
Draw lunch time is 8:13. We're on the line with 1st District Congressman here in New Hampshire, Republican Frank Guinta, who's giving us an update on all of the fun that we are watching in Washington. Frank, as you take a look, I know you don't sit on any of the armed or foreign armed services or foreign relations committees, but clearly what's happening in Libya is a problem. Our ambassador appears to have been, in fact, assassinated by radical Islamic groups. You have the Libyan government itself saying that this was a planned attack. Well, the administration keeps on this folly about it being a spontaneous reaction to a YouTube video. Where do you come down on this, and what should our country be doing at this point in time to let the perpetrators of this heinous crime know that we are not amused?
Rich, I want to kind of reiterate that when an ambassador is killed, let's think of what an ambassador's role is. This is the president's emissary, essentially the president's representative in a foreign country on sovereign ground. And I don't believe that it was solely a 14-minute video that sparked this. And you have to go look at the attacks on different embassies over the course of the last several months that appeared to be coordinated, number one. Number two, if it was so spontaneous, why would you have an RPG with you during the attack? It just doesn't, pass the smell test to, I think, Americans that this administration and the UN ambassador in her claims that this was a spontaneous reaction. And I don't believe so. I don't think, Americans believe that. So I think the president needs to stand firm on behalf of every American. I think the president needs to demand immediate action from the government in Libya as well as Egypt and the other countries where these actions continue to take place. I think there needs to be an immediate apology to the United States not the other way around. And I think there needs to be immediate military strength around every single embassy to ensure that this doesn't continue to occur. Now, there were several mistakes made, Rich. I mean, on 9/11, you would expect that we would have our military forces beefed up in certain locations around our nation and around the world. That appears not to have happened. So, we'll continue to see how this unfolds, but, America needs to act, it needs to be strong, and we need, real leadership when it comes to one of our ambassadors being brutally murdered and then dragged through the streets to be shown on, local TV in Libya and in Egypt to continue to incite and engage what I think is terrorist activity.
More with Congressman Frank Guinta right after we take a break for traffic and weather, which starts in 30 seconds.
This is Josh Chamberlain, co-host of Drop the Gloves and owner of Chamberlain Antiques. The selling of valued family heirlooms can be a difficult and overwhelming task. If you have fine antiques or works of art, a single item or entire estate, please do not hesitate to call us at 603-769-3390. You can also find us online at chamberlainantiques.com. Chamberlain Antiques is a limited liability corporation.
Good morning, Manchester. I'm DJ Dave with traffic in your own backyard. Bridge inspection on the Notre Dame Bridge from 8:30 to 4 o'clock today. Expect lane closures in the westbound lanes. Sewell Street is closed from South Beach Street to Blossom Street. Heavy traffic on South Main Street, Bridge Street, Granite Street, and moderate to heavy on Queen City Avenue. On the highways, moderate volume on 114, moderate to heavy volume on 101 in Bedford. No traffic issues to or from the Seacoast. Moderate volume on Route 3 southbound from the Bedford tolls into Merrimack clears up nicely after Merrimack. And no traffic issues for north or southbound commuters on I-93. If you see traffic trouble, you can always share it with us at 672-0573. Stay tuned for Weather with Al. He's next.
It's Weather with Al.
Good morning, Manchester. Forecast for today. If there's any partial sun early this morning, it'll fade. Mostly cloudy. A few rain showers will develop before the day is over. 68 to 73 degrees. For tonight, we'll have a period of heavy rain with gusty southerly winds. An isolated thunderstorm can't be ruled out. We could see 1 to 3 inches of rain overnight tonight. Lows tonight much warmer in the middle 60s and more humid. Any downpours, isolated thunderstorms early tomorrow morning and remaining mostly cloudy on Wednesday, 65 to 70 degrees. Thursday, mixture of sun and clouds, mid to upper 60s. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Al Caprillin. For more extensive forecast, you can go to GirardLodge.com. This is WBIN TV meteorologist Al Caprillin for Girard Lodge Weather.
Girard Lodge time is 8:19. We continue now with Republican Representative Frank Guinta of our 1st District here in New Hampshire. Frank, there anything in particular that's going on in Congress that because you're on some pretty important committees. You're on the Financial Services Committee now, and I know you put out a statement regarding QE3, quantitative easing 3. Is there nothing that Congress can do to rein in this runaway train wreck named Ben Bernanke as he continues to deflate the value of our money?
We lost Frank Guinta for a minute. He's back, so you might have to repeat that question.
Okay. Yes.
You there, Rich?
Yes, I'm here, Steve. Thank you. So, Frank,
yes.
As I was asking, you put out a statement on the Fed's launching of QE3, quantitative easing 3. Is there nothing that the House or the Congress can do to rein in this runaway train wreck named Ben Bernanke, who seems intent on devaluing our dollar so badly that we'll soon be competing with the Mexican peso?
I was so disappointed to see Ben Bernanke announce QE3, quantitative easing 3. Essentially what he's doing, Rich, is in trying to inject $40 billion per month into the economy, but the way he's doing that is by printing additional dollars. So what that means,
bringing a water tanker to a flood and thinking it's going to help the problem.
Well, and that's the underlining, that's the real problem here, is you have a president who's not acting in terms of legislative initiatives. You have a House that has made proposals that we feel will be good public policy to try to stimulate the economy through private sector growth and through regulatory reform, through tax relief, and through spending reductions, and through mandatory spending reform. We have, and then obviously the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which is affects 1/6 of our economy. So we have done a whole host of legislative proposals in the House, all of which essentially have been rejected by the Senate and the President. So it appears that the President is now relying on Ben Bernanke to inject $40 billion a month now in QE3 to try to stimulate the economy. And what that means for you and I and every one of your listeners is that the dollar in their wallet today is worth less than it was yesterday. Now, the dollar is already at a 40-year low, first of all. Second of all, you will see at some point not just devaluation of the dollar, but inflation that will occur massively. If you look at QE1 and QE2, I would make the argument that neither worked. So why is a QE3 going to work? So your question was, can the legislative body do anything about it? We have very limited power and authority over the Federal Reserve. We can issue resolutions. We can, as we did earlier this year, pass the legislation in the House that was authored by Ron Paul, a bill that I co-sponsored, which is to audit the Fed so we know exactly what they're doing with their dollars. But this is a presidential appointment, and unless we have a change in the presidency, or a change in fiscal policy from the current president, you're not going to see much different from the Federal Reserve Chairman. And it's frustrating to America, and I think it's frustrating to most economists because it's going to elongate what's been already a very, very long recession.
Well, Frank, and I'm glad to know that you co-sponsored Ron Paul's bill on auditing the Fed, but at some point, and I'm just a dopey radio show host, it seems to me that the Fed is giving good reason for Jefferson's suspicions about the dangers of a central bank being more or being greater than that of a standing army on one's own soil. At what point do we say that there should not be an agency so powerful in the United States of America that it is not subject to the governing bodies?
Well, we're obviously getting closer and closer to that day, particularly because you've had, 4 years now of, questionable at best economic policy coming out from the Fed. If you look at, the interest rate levels today and the loan rate levels, it's not allowing the fundamentals of our economy to sort of snap back and grow. And part of this is housing. Part of it is Wall Street and bad actors. But part of it is just the overall fundamentals of our economic foundation and financial institution foundations. And when you've got banks that are incapable right now of making money on interloan rates because the rate is so low, you are then forcing and injecting an alternative approach to how to move the economy going forward. And unfortunately, what you're seeing, Rich, now is not a creation of new banks, but a reduction of the number of existing banks as well as credit unions all around the country, which for you and I means less choice, less options, less access to credit for the different markets that we may want to borrow money. So we've got to resolve this. I'm very much hoping that the election resolves it. Should the election not resolve it, then we'll have to have a very serious and thoughtful legislative discussion about how can we have some influence over positive policy that needs to come out of the Federal Reserve.
Well, and speaking of elections, while this is an official visit on the show arranged by your congressional office, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the pending election and the debate you just had with your predecessor, Carol Shea Porter. Didn't sound like she was playing nice in the sandbox based on the news reports that we were able to gather. And you're tied with her in the latest polls, Congressman. I guess what I'd like to know is what your take is on the race, and given all that's happening in the economy and all that is out there in her record about her insatiable desire to tax and spend. How do the polls show you tied? Do you believe those polls? And what do you think the fault lines are going to be in this election as we head toward November?
Well, first of all, this was the first debate that we had post-primary. It was hosted by the BIA, the union leader, New Hampshire Public TV, New Hampshire Public Radio. And it was supposed to be solely on, economic issues and the economy. The first question that was asked to my opponent, she started attacking me. And she was attacking me throughout the entire debate, to the point where, you could hear grumblings and groans from the audience. And I reiterated, my position that this should be about policy, it should be about substance, it should be about what we each offer for the future of America from a legislative policy perspective. In terms of the polling, you've got to look at, number one, who's doing the polling, and you've got to look at who exactly they're polling. And the one thing that you would see out of the WMUR UNH polling is that 43% of the people that are polling are Democrats. So I'm not sure if it's a true reflection, Rich, of what the outcome of the turnout model will be in November. That being said, you don't campaign by polling data, whether it's favoring you or favoring somebody else. You campaign based on, what you think is the best representation of your congressional district and the people you represent, the philosophy that you have, and the approach that you plan on taking as, the people's representative in Washington. So, that's how I've maintained this campaign. I think it was unfortunate that my opponent went negative yesterday. She started with a TV ad today that, again, is negative. And that should tell you something about where she thinks she is in this race. When you are attacking somebody, typical, standard is that means you're behind. Now, I'm taking this race seriously, as I think everybody should. I'm working very hard to earn people's support, earn people's vote on Election Day, November 6th, and, I'm specifically asking for people to support, the approach that I'm taking, which is being a responsible, respectful member of Congress that is focusing on pro-growth policies that will reduce spending, that will reduce our debt and deficit, get us back to balance, and really give Americans the opportunity that we had when we were growing up based on the fiscal policies under Ronald Reagan. So I think that there are two clear choices here, and I think on Election Day, people will vote Frank Guinta.
And this just came across Twitter. Kevin Landrigan of the Nashua Telegraph is reporting that the House Majority PAC is beginning a 2-week, $400,000 ad buy to pound Charlie Bass in the 2nd District. Frank, are you aware of any outside money like this that's going to be spent against you?
I'm not aware of it yet. I understand that the House Majority PAC, which is, that's a PAC, my understanding, that it's run by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House. And my understanding is that there is an ad that starts today that beats up Charlie. I have not seen it. I'm not aware of any outside groups that have played in the 1st Congressional District, with the exception of one, a super PAC called Credo, which is a cell phone-based company in San Francisco that is spending $3 million against 10 members, one of which is me. So it's supporting Carol Porter, opposing, me, but I'm not up to speed on what their activities are, but they've been engaged in the 1st Congressional District for several months now.
All right, Congressman Guinta from New Hampshire's 1st District, Manchester's former mayor, thank you for joining us here this morning on Girard at Large.
My pleasure, Rich. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too, Frank. David, how are the roads?